Right, so the second part of my day, my first day, was all about models. So this is what this will be. Why are you not working? There we go. So I didn't quite understand just how important models were before coming into this. Um, Basically, if you're a non-technical person, it's going to be quite difficult. There's no getting away from it from the sort of M&A point of view. The model you build models to go into your IMs, um, to sort of forecast how performance is going to be and predict company performance. From a due diligence point of view, you build models to audit the company, or almost audit the company performance, um, and ascertain whether the deal value is genuine. And then from a PE point of view, you build models to find out whether a acquisition is a profitable one or not. So across the sort of CF space, there's always going to be model building. And yes, the sort of marketing materials like the teasers and the IMs and all the rest of it are really important to display company information. But the majority of it is predicated upon the model. If you have a shit model, you won't be able to attract. Well, the deal will just fall apart really, and you won't get one done. And therefore, to build a good model, what is required? Um, One is to really know your business. If you don't understand how the business operates, you're going to get nowhere. So you need to have like a very in-depth view of the different business streams, different costs, cost centers, how everything really interacts. Um, the other thing is to have a sort of very commercial understanding. Um, so you need to understand what the client is looking for. How do they report internally, or the purpose, whatever the purpose of the model is, what is the user looking for from that model, and then help to build it to that point. Now we'll come into that a little bit more later on. But the final thing I'd say is the sort of communication. So this is both internally with your team and also externally with the client. So with your team, to make sure that they're sort of on top of it, any issues are flagged up early and everyone's on the same page. With the client, it's more that from the offset you want to work in tandem with them, just because if you come towards the end of the process and display something brand new to them, if it's not to their liking, you'll have to go away and completely rebuild it, and that's a lot of wasted time and effort. So those are the three main skills. So yesterday, in one day, there were three different meetings, one internal, two external, about models and model building. The internal meeting was the first one, and how I understood it was the client gave the let's say the partner the outputs required. They said we want these KPIs, we want this level of dashboard functionality, we want to see this and that, blah blah blah. So the partner, in tandem with the, let's call this manager, went through the sort of inputs. So what information to use, how are we going to link data, what data to display, that sort of thing, so that we can end up with those inputs. And the manager was on the call with the associate, in effect, my level, and then that was about sort of the model populating. So with the formulas, with the data, making sure everything's neat and tidy, pulling everything through, basically just populating it all and getting it done. And it was this bit here which was really critical, and which is like what differentiates a good model builder from the best. So to understand, yeah, these are the client requirements and stuff, blah blah blah, but how are we going to start? How are we going to get there from this massive data listings that we've been provided from the client? So the example yesterday was one of the companies, sort of a refuse vehicle hire business. They had over 1,500 vehicles. So some of the things the client wanted to see was sort of the liability on the leases associated with the vehicles, the sort of lease term, the depreciation, the scrap value. So all of these different things, and it's going through the data listing, which in this case was a fixed asset register, and checking what information is there, and then building it from that, and then going back to the client. Now, models generally are very complicated beings, but my understanding is that it's repetition of a few key concepts over and over, which is where sort of like you can simplify a bit more and it becomes a bit more understandable. So we'll start with the first external call. So this was with the client who has all those vehicles and stuff, and it was with the CFO. So call one. So it's at the early stages still. So we've been contracted to build this model. The business is going to be carved out and sold in a few months' time to a private equity firm, and they basically want to build a model to show the exact financials of the business division being sold and also the business division being kept. They want to monitor the performance of that division as well separately for internal purposes. So, in effect, building two models. So some of the things that at these early stages that were discussed were the sort of client terminology. So the client had their own internal way of referring to things, and it's important to sort of get to grips with that. So they're comfortable, or you're comfortable with all the terms and words being used. So, for example, they'd call the fixed asset register the monster spreadsheet just because it was so big, and in the names of the different vehicles and categories were all different, and he's sort of getting to grips with that. The other thing was issues with the current data. So the whole reason we're building the model is it doesn't have these issues, so it's important to understand what the status quo is. And these are sort of like miscategorizations of assets, non-assets included in the listing, that sort of thing. So once we sort of understood that, the other thing was to move on to like the logistics. So reporting, deadlines, when does this model need to be built by, client staff relevant. So this was a call with a CFO, but naturally a CFO won't be dealing with the nitty-gritty details of these spreadsheets. So who will we need to contact, that sort of thing. And then also, following from that internal call earlier this morning, the CF team sort of had a request of deliverables. So these are things saying, well, we want XYZ amount of extra detail on the fixed asset register so that we are better able to build that model. We need a certain amount of raw data to build that model. So that's something that was requested. But there was a bit of back and forth, sort of reporting limitations added, what the client can and can't provide. If you're selling a business which has a lot of vehicles in this time, what's really important is the carbon footprint. So understanding what fuel types these vehicles have was quite important, and the client was basically like, it's going to take quite some time to get that information, and it's not going to be immediate. So that was pushed back a little bit, and it's something that will be added to the model later on. So yeah, that was one of the calls, and then the second call was with a client where the model had already been built. So this is the sort of late stage. We built a model for the seller of a business, and we acted on their behalf, and then it was audited by PwC, who were working on behalf of a PE firm. Client and us. So that's basically the teams there. And PwC had already audited this model twice to include a reforecasting period. So when a deal timeline is quite long, you tend to have like a reforecasting to update for actuals. And so there were two different models. Update the first one, and then the second one updated for actuals as the deal timeline sort of dragged on. PwC had audited both, and that was fine. They didn't have any significant issues. But then the PE firm came in. Some of the questions they were asking were about the legitimacy of the model. So they want to know if internal management are using this third-party prepared model, because if it's no value to them, i.e. the sellers, it won't be of any value to the buyers. So it's understanding like how the model came from the data sources, i.e. the management accounts, how it was built up, how it's being used in the future, and if, for example, like it's built quite closely with management, it's built. That's quite important. Like write that down. If it's built using client data, and finally used by the client in this case being the seller, so going forward, then that all adds towards the legitimacy of the model. So you also sort of understand a bit more about what information the client provided to us for us to build a model. So it's 3 years of prior data, the current year, actual year-to-date data, and then the client forecast for the next year. So their detailed level forecast beyond the 1 year horizon. Their sort of forecasts weren't detailed at all, so that's where we come in. And this was also like times 4 because they'd made 4 different acquisitions, the seller. So it was a big sort of group business. So it was a very sort of detailed model, and then what the client provided was like tons and tons of spreadsheets. So what we did, we sort of consolidated that into one sort of model for ease. And calls like these are really important because if you were to sort of see that model initially, first glance is massively complicated, and talking you through sort of makes it easier to understand. So one of the things is making sure like you go through this model in like granular level of detail. That's how it's made up, very, very detailed. So it's all the way from like her T accounts and double entry into like a TB and profit P&L, and then you get the model. And it's only with that level of granular level of detail that the buyer feels comfortable that you're not really skimping, that you have checked everything, and with a sort of double entry approach you find out any errors. Now as a seller, the errors are massively important because it makes the buyer question the integrity of the model. If they find something, an error, they might go down a rabbit hole and keep looking and keep looking. And that just opens you up for further scrutiny, or it opens you up for like whether the deal price is bona fide. And basically, this is how deals fall apart. So it's massively important to make sure any errors are rectified before it goes to the buyers. And the biggest sort of errors, the big no-nos, are anything that affects cash, because that's what will drive the deal price. So sort of in this model, there were a couple of errors with the capitalization of PPE and staff costs, but because it didn't really affect cash, the buyer wasn't too fussed. So the other things queried were in this call the assumptions used, for in particular for growth. So what assumptions are you using for the business expansion in the future? Which streams are predicted to grow? Why is that? And also like the model capacity to deal with any future acquisitions. So the model had been built so you could keep acquiring new companies, add it to the model, and it'd still give you that consolidated picture. So that was all built in. It was also highlighted just how detailed it was. With regards to payroll, it was all based on actual employees rather than any averages, which made the buyer feel at ease a bit more. So yeah, the buyers were just really happy with the level of detail, and the call was more just as assurance for them that the sellers do believe in the model, they're using the model, and also just to understand a bit more about how it works. And that was day one, so you can sort of see just how important these models are. So these calls are with like CFOs and private equity partners and things like that. And they're still going through these models line by line, row by row. So you can see there's no sort of getting away from it, no matter how senior you are. These models are of massive importance. So yeah, hopefully can get to grips with it very soon. How do I close this?